This natural stench was used for communication by the Jawas, who had extremely acute senses of smell, which they could use to determine a Jawa's identity, mood, physical condition, lineage, maturity, arousal, and the last meal from their body odor alone. Jawas could subsist solely on hubba gourds due to their highly efficient digestive systems, but they also ate a number of other foods for variety, including the meat of several Tatooine animals. Apart from their strong senses of smell, Jawas also had particularly keen night vision. Much like the Sand People, the Jawas wore long, loose-fitting desert robes that covered their whole bodies at all times, except for their hands. The Jawas didn't have the same taboos against exposed skin as the Sand People, but they still usually kept everything except their hands covered for protection against Tatooine's harsh climate. Jawa robes were brown and hooded, and they were designed to protect Jawas from the heat of the suns. They were also coated in a special solution that allowed them to trap moisture, which helped Jawas avoid dehydration. Jawas often wore tool belts or bandoliers over their robes, and under their hoods, they wore black cloth shrouds that obscured their faces. These shrouds prevented moisture loss, and the Jawas implanted polished gemstones into them to act as goggles, protecting the Jawas' sensitive eyes from Tatooine's unforgiving twin suns. These gemstones were usually orange or red, and they appeared to glow in the reflected light of the suns. They were sometimes mistaken for the Jawas' eyes. The Jawas spoke a complex, highly variable language known as Jawaese. Jawaese was notoriously hard to understand, both because Jawas spoke it extremely quickly and because it was partly scent-based. Jawas' scent added tone and several layers of meaning to Jawaese, and without it, the language was just a collection of meaningless syllables. Jawas also had a trade language for communication with outsiders, however, which was a variant of Jawaese that was exclusively verbal. The Jawa trade language was clunky and hard to understand, but it could be learned and spoken by non-Jawas. Most of Tatooine's settlers could speak enough of the Jawa trade language to barter with them, and a number of Jawaese words and phrases made it into the local jargon. The name Tatooine, in fact, was derived from the Jawaese name from the planet, which was Utinni. Jawas had a largely communal culture based around scavenging, originally for food, and later mostly for pieces of abandoned technology. Jawas lived in large clans, which were led by several clan chiefs and a shaman. Each clan was based in a settlement from which the clan would dispatch bands of scavengers on a regular basis. Clan chiefs were male and oversaw the clan's scavenger bands, leaving with them on expeditions, while the clan shaman was female and stayed home in the settlement. The shaman ruled the whole clan, and she could be chosen for various reasons. Some were chosen for being force-sensitive, others were chosen for having visions or unexpectedly overcoming childhood illnesses, and still others were just chosen by the current shaman to be her successor. The Jawas believed their shamans had magical powers, which the shamans used to perform spells to bless the clan and keep it safe. Shamans were also believed to be able to see the future, and they were often consulted for their wisdom by other Jawas. Apart from the shamans though, Jawa society was mostly patriarchal, with most of the power in any given clan held by males. Originally, Jawa clans were nomadic, but this left them vulnerable to the beasts of the desert, as well as to the Sand People, who often kidnapped Jawas for use as slaves. Over time, the Jawas thus shifted toward a more sedentary lifestyle, with clans establishing settlements, usually heavily fortified ones, high in the mountains, from which they dispatched bands of scavengers to roam around, gather food and salvage, and haul them back to the settlement. The clans mostly kept to themselves. Each clan had its own designated salvaging territory, and they preferred to keep out of each other's way. Once per year, however, all the Jawa clans would send out representatives to a swap meet in the Dune Sea. During the annual Great Swap Meet, the clans would trade and exchange salvage, and the clan chiefs would take the opportunity to meet and deal with inter-clan diplomacy. This involved exchanging navigational data and arranging inter-clan marriages to maintain the Jawa's cultural and genetic diversity. The Jawas treated marriages like business arrangements, with the clans of the bride and the groom haggling until they reached an agreeable deal. One of the two partners would become a member of their spouse's clan, and in exchange, their original clan would be given a favorable trade agreement or a shipment of salvage. Unlike the culture of the Sand People, which stubbornly resisted as much outside influence as possible, Jawa culture was heavily shaped by the waves of settlers that came to Tatooine. In the early days of settlement on Tatooine, some Jawas resented the settlers, but unlike their larger cousins, the Jawas weren't hostile to them. Instead, all but a few Jawas saw the settlers as a valuable business opportunity. They traded with and scavenged for each successive generation of settlers, adopting their technology into their way of life. Eventually, the resentment some Jawas held toward the settlers faded and then vanished entirely. This earned the Jawas the ire of the Sand People, who began attacking Jawa clans and scavenger bands looking for slaves, but this only drove the Jawas further into the arms of the outsiders, from whom they now sought protection as well as trade. Before long, however, the Jawas became better equipped to protect themselves, as successive waves of settlers abandoned Tatooine and left their technologies for the Jawas to commandeer. This included Sandcrawlers, which completely transformed Jawa society. As we'll discuss more in a bit, most of Tatooine's early settlers were miners, and when they settled on the planet, they imported enormous mining vehicles to tear up the Dune Sea in search of ore deposits. These mining efforts all inevitably failed for the reasons we'll get into later, and when they did, these Sandcrawlers were simply left behind in the desert, as it wasn't cost-effective to haul such massive vehicles off-world. Once abandoned, the Sandcrawlers were commandeered by the Jawas, who transformed them into mobile fortresses from which scavenger bands could conduct their operations. After the departure of Zerka Corporation, sometime around 3900 BBY left the Jawas with their first Sandcrawlers, the Jawas' fortunes began to improve. No longer would the Jawas be dependent on the settlers for protection, and no longer would Jawa scavenger bands be vulnerable to Sand People attacks. Now, scavenger bands could work from the safety of these enormous machines, and while the Sand People were capable of attacking and disabling Sandcrawlers from time to time, they did so less frequently, as Sandcrawlers weren't nearly as easy a target as Jawa bands had been previously. Additionally, as the Sand People had regularly attacked Sandcrawler convoys during mining operations, the machines had been modified to better withstand assault. The Sandcrawlers used by the Jawas in the modern era, which were left by the Corellian Mining Corporation in 70 BBY, could withstand Sand People attacks and even angry crate dragons. Sandcrawlers became mobile homes for entire Jawa salvage bands, with up to 300 Jawas living on each Sandcrawler. The Sandcrawlers' ore processing machinery was reconfigured to process salvage instead, and their storage holds were used for storing spare parts and lost droids. The Jawas rebuilt their whole culture around their Sandcrawlers, which became the symbols of their clans, the place where most Jawas lived and worked for most of the year, only occasionally returning to their clan holds in the mountains. Jawa clan settlements were also transformed by interactions with the settlers. The Jawas used pieces of old, wrecked starships to create towering fortress walls around the perimeter of their clan holds, creating a mighty defensive perimeter that could even keep out crate dragons. These fortresses were located high in the mountains, with the only known Jawa mountain fortress being located in the Hubba Heights area of the northern Junlan Wastes. Within their mountain fortresses, the Jawas serviced their Sandcrawlers, kept their hordes of scrap and droids, and raised their children. Jawa females, including each clan's shaman, lived in the fortress year-round, while most adult Jawa males lived most of their lives in the Sandcrawlers, returning to the fortresses only during the storm season, during which the Sandcrawlers would be repaired, their salvage would be offloaded, and the scavengers would return to their families. As successive waves of settlers arrived on Tatooine, the Jawas slowly shifted from their original lifestyle of scavenging for food to scavenging for technology left out in the desert. This started mostly out of curiosity, But as the settlers became established, salvaging became a way of life for the Jawas, who found they could profit from the trade in scrap and droids, and then use their profits to buy food and water from the settlers, which was much easier than searching for food and water outright. Food and water were scarce on Tatooine, while wreckage from space battles and past settlement efforts was everywhere. The Jawas seemingly had a natural gift for salvaging too.